Hi, and welcome to Digital Logic Circuits. Today we're going to be going through a quick example on timing analysis and looking at how a signal can propagate through a circuit. Now before we get into the circuit, I just wanted to take a second to review the four basic logic gates you'll be seeing today. We have the AND gate, the output for which is 1 if both inputs are 1. We have the OR gate, the output for which is 1 if either of the inputs is 1. The inverter, the output for which is the opposite of what you put in. So if you put in a 0, you get a 1. If you put in a 1, you get a 0. And the most complicated gate, the exclusive OR gate. It's basically the same thing as an OR gate, but the output combination for 1, 1 is a 0. So the output is only 1 if one of the two inputs is 1, not if both are. So now we're going to look at a simple circuit that involves all four of those basic gates. Now when you built this circuit, you probably thought only about the three inputs A, B, and C and the output G. You didn't really care too much about what happens in the middle of it. But when you really build this circuit, there's going to be time delays through each of these blocks. We'll pretend that there's just a 1 nanosecond delay for every circuit element that the signal has to go through. That might not be the case in real life, but it'll make it a lot easier for us to look at this example. So we're going to take a simple input combination and see what will happen if we change one of the signals. So let's say that A starts out at 0, B starts out at 1, and C starts out at 1. So we've got 0, 1, and 1. We can pretend that this circuit's been sitting here for a long time, so these signals have propagated through the entire thing. So that means that at node D, we'll have the OR of A and B, so 0 ORed with 1 gives us a 1. At E, it's the AND of B and C, so 1 and 1 is also a 1. F is the opposite of E, so that'll be a 0. And G is going to be the exclusive OR of D and F, which will be a 1. Now, let's pretend that we change one of these inputs. We'll change B from 1 to 0. So we can see the circuit, the signal goes through it, this will still be a 0. We'll drop this down to a 0, and we'll say this is still 1. Now, D, E, F, and G have not had time to react to this signal yet, so they're still going to be exactly the same. This will still be a 1, this will still be a 1, this will still be a 0, and this will still be a 1. Now, if we go 1 nanosecond later in time, the signal has had time to propagate through the first two gates. So D is now the OR of 0 and 0. That means it's going to drop from 1 down to 0. Now, A, B, and C have all stayed the same because we haven't flipped our inputs yet. So they're still 0, 0, and 1. E is now the AND of B and C, which is 0 and 1 gives us a 0. F has not had time to react yet, so it stays as 0. And G has not had time to react yet, so it stays at 1. I'll just fill in those numbers so we don't forget what they are. Now, let's go 1 more nanosecond in time and see what happens. The signal propagates through that inverter, right? So A, B, and C are still the same. We haven't changed them. D stays the same because that's already settled out. E stays the same because it's now had time to react. F has now had time to react to the 0 on E, which means it's going to take a transition up to 1. Now you might think that's it, but G has now had time to react to this change on D. It's been 1 whole nanosecond. So we now have the exclusive OR of 0 and 0 that is propagated through this, and that will change the signal down to a 0. So if we give it 1 more nanosecond for everything to settle out, A is still 0, B is still 0, C is still 1, D is still 0, E is still 0, F is still 1, and now the signal has finally propagated through G, which is the exclusive OR combination of 0 and 1 on D and F, which gives us an output of 1. Now, as a circuit designer, the only thing you cared about when you built this circuit was that if I give it an input of 0, 1, 1, I want an output of 1. And if I give it an input of 0, 0, 1, I want an output of 1. You didn't really pay too much attention to what happens in between the output settling. Now, if the output changes to a 0, it might not be a big deal depending on what you're building. But let's say you work for the government and you are building something that launches a missile. If that 0 is the launch missile signal, the missile is going to launch if it goes there for just a nanosecond. So there are a few tricks we have to play when we build circuits like this to make sure everything works out the way we want. We can take the signal and we can pass it through an AND gate with an enable signal on it. As long as enable is equal to 0, the output here will be 0. But if we change the enable signal to 1, it will pass through whatever signal is behind it. So we'll see the output G from this node right here on the output of that AND gate. So this lets us decide when we want to look at the output, because we know what the delay is of this circuit. So whenever we change enable, we only have to wait maybe 1 nanosecond, maybe 10, depending on how we built the circuit. Another trick we could play to get the output to not bounce in the middle is we could take this OR gate over here and we could change the delay of it to 2 nanoseconds. Now, the delay, the amount of time it would take to get through that OR gate is the same amount of time it would take to get through this AND gate and this inverter. So both of these signals would have arrived at the exclusive OR gate at the same time, and the output would have stayed 1 down here. There wouldn't have been any bouncing. There are other ways you can get around this, and it's something that you have to be very careful of when you're building circuits. It's a very advanced topic, and it's one that I hope you'll study in detail.